Good evening. The oil giant ExxonMobil has scrapped plans to build a pipeline from its refinery at Fawley on Southampton Water to a carbon dioxide storage site under the English Channel. It was a key part of its plans for carbon capture, but had caused controversy on both sides of the Solent. The company will now look at other ways of reducing emissions, as our Hampshire and Isle of Wight political reporter Emily Hudson explains.
Just this week, councillors meeting to work out how to try and stop the Solent CO2 pipeline being put under the Isle of Wight. They've been worried about damage to the environment, disruption and the safety of such a high-pressure pipe under open spaces. ExxonMobil had said it was needed to help it meet its decarbonisation target by 2050. There were three possible routes for the pipeline, going from Fawley and then either through the New Forest or under the Isle of Wight to a storage area in the English Channel. None of them was supported by local people.
Driving a 6-lane motorway across many miles of either the Isle of Wight or the New Forest, a very destructive process through two environmentally very sensitive areas.
But this afternoon, ExxonMobil said it was not progressing the development. Campaigners are delighted.
The strength of feeling on the island about it, with all the reactions that we've had since the project was announced and, the destruction it would have caused to our nature, to our tourist industry, it was just so many issues, safety aspects, that this news is great, that they've had to reconsider and look at different options.
The company said it spent many years trying to secure long-term, stable government policies and get investment for the project, but had concluded it wasn't a competitive investment at this time. It said it will explore other options for decarbonisation, but for those farming these fields, it will be incredibly welcome news. Emily Hudson, BBC South Today.
At 7 with the latest BBC News for Hampshire, Dorset and the Isle of Wight, I'm Michael Coombs. Campaigners say they're delighted after plans to build a carbon dioxide pipeline, which could have run under the Isle of Wight, have been scrapped. ExxonMobil had been considering three options, from its Fawley refinery near Southampton to a CO2 storage site under the English Channel. But the oil giant says it's dropping the plans, blaming the government for uncertainty. But our political reporter Emily Hudson says it might now not be the end of the matter.
It has been said that this industry is quite difficult to decarbonise. They've still got that target of 2050, of course, laid down by the government. So the company has said it will be looking at other options. It's working on a range of alternatives to reduce emissions from its plant at Fawley.
And meanwhile, the government is to announce today it will invest nearly £22 billion in what it calls groundbreaking projects to capture and store carbon dioxide. Ministers say the new developments in Merseyside and Teesside will create thousands of jobs and pave the way for a clean energy revolution.
Right, 8 minutes after 7.
The sound. The sound of.
The sound of the South.
Alan Newman.
At breakfast. BBC Radio Solent.
We'll be chatting Strictly very soon here on BBC Radio Solent. But one of our top stories this morning, campaigners who've been fighting plans for a carbon dioxide pipe link linking Fawley and the English Channel are waking up with a smile on their face this morning. ExxonMobil announced late yesterday afternoon it was withdrawing these plans. But what does it mean for the oil giant's bid to hit net zero? Our political reporter Emily Hudson joins me now from the New Forest. Morning, Emily. Was this a surprise?
Morning, Lucy. It's fair to say it was. I've spent all week out on the Isle of Wight and in the New Forest speaking to campaigners who've been fighting this pipeline. This summer, ExxonMobil held a series of consultation events in both those areas, trying to get people to pick their preferred route for this pipeline. Now, it's part of a carbon capture project. If you don't know what that is, basically emissions that come out of the chimneys at Fawley Oil Refinery are literally captured and sent in a high-pressure pipeline to a storage area under the seabed in the English Channel. Now, it's the first time this kind of thing would have been happening down here on the south coast. And it was highly controversial because once the pipeline left Fawley, it needed to be put underneath the New Forest and either carrying on underneath the New Forest towards Milford-on-Sea or going under the Solent and then underneath the whole of the Isle of Wight, either north to south or north to west. People were very unhappy about what that might mean for the environment, whether or not this pipeline was safe. So there was a significant objection crew forming. What was such a shock was that yesterday Exxon literally sent an email to stakeholders, that's interested parties like MPs and politicians who they'd been consulting with, councils, to say that they decided this wasn't a competitive investment and they wouldn't be pursuing the plan for carbon capture storage in the English Channel. Therefore, this pipeline was no longer needed. Now, what we know from this morning's news is that they were saying that government policy was unsure. Of course, this morning we found out that the government has pledged £22 million for carbon capture projects, but in Merseyside and Teesside. So it's safe to assume that perhaps Exxon had been told, you're not getting money towards this project on the south coast because the money is going to the north of England. Keir Starmer visiting the northwest with the Chancellor today to say that this move reignites our industrial heartlands. I wonder if that's part of the reason that ExxonMobil decided this wasn't a competitive investment, if it wasn't getting the same government backing as those schemes in the north. Now, although campaigners are absolutely delighted, you'll be hearing from one in just a minute, there is a point here to make that Exxon still does have to decarbonise Fawley, because Fawley produces things we need: rubber for tyres, medical plastics, fuel. There is no quick, easy solution for these things, finding others. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of all that industrial production. And the company has said it needs to look at alternative ways now to help decarbonise by, of course, this net zero target of 2050. Back to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Emily Hudson there. Let's hear from, well, as Emily said, Bob Comley is Vice Chair of the Solent Protection Society. They're a group, they try to protect the area's ecology and environment, and Bob is with me now. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi, how are you feeling this morning? When did you hear this news that the pipeline was not happening?
I heard the news round about, I think it was 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon.
And your thoughts, your reaction? I mean, Emily said she was quite surprised, quite shocked. What about you?
Well, I was delighted. We've been highlighting right from the start that ExxonMobil were very late entrants into the UK carbon capture and storage market. And they seem to be grasping at straws to catch up by trying to fast-track a far bigger programme of work using the Solent cluster as a front. And in our view, and I think many people, certainly on the Isle of Wight and in the Forest, it was never going to fly. And obviously today, with the government announcing £22 billion worth of funding for the East Coast cluster and the HyNet Northwest cluster, ExxonMobil have probably caved in to stop hemorrhaging more cash.
Mm-hmm. Something does need to be done, though, Bob, doesn't it? You know, it's got to be more green. It's got to, as Emily was saying, the need for decarbonising. You are a group that looks after the coastline. But if not that, then there's got to be another alternative, surely, which is what, in your opinion?
Well, that's a difficult one. Fawley certainly has to decarbonise. But it's interesting, there's another new Forest resident that you might be familiar with, Jim Ratcliffe, who's busy in Barcelona today, I think, with the America's Cup. Jim Ratcliffe owns Grangemouth with PetroChina. Now, Grangemouth is the other UK elderly oil refinery. And if you saw the news 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was confirmed that Grangemouth is actually decommissioning. They're decommissioning the site and converting it to be a biofuel refinery, and also converting part of the plant to be actually an import dock for imported fuels. And I think we're going to start seeing government strategy changing over the next few months and years to recognise the fact that it's almost impossible to decarbonise somewhere like Fawley economically, which I think ExxonMobil have found.
We have had a message actually here at BBC Radio Solent from Lizzie in South Baddesley, who says we owed a debt of gratitude to your society, the Solent Protection Society, for their hard work and for keeping us informed. So do you feel that your objection to this, do you feel that's helped to have this result?
I really don't know. I think the wonderful thing about this has been the way the community has risen. We did our bit by I think everybody was on a very strong learning curve here. We didn't know about carbon capture. We didn't know about net zero, to be perfectly honest. We've all had to learn. And as we learned as a society, then we started putting posts up on the website and broadcasting what we were finding out, and realizing that things up north were going in a much stronger direction and a far more sensible direction. The really interesting thing down here is that the only seriously dirty industry, if you like, from a carbon viewpoint, is actually SO Fawley itself. So the only beneficiary, the only main beneficiary of this project would have been ExxonMobil, which seems slightly strange. What was more strange was the fact that they were choosing to run pipelines across land, where the obvious thing that's being done elsewhere around the North Sea and up, say, for places like South Wales, they're preparing to liquidize CO2 and ship it out by tanker, pumping it into the old North Sea aquifers from a sea base.
Okay. Well, listen, it's interesting, isn't it? You kind of wonder how much these local groups have an impact when you're dealing with something like ExxonMobil. Thank you so much for coming on. Bob Comley, they're Vice Chair of the Solent Protection Society. They're a group. They try to protect the area's ecology and environment. The story that campaigners have been fighting for a carbon dioxide pipeline. This is linking Fawley in the English Channel. Waking up this morning, ExxonMobil announcing late yesterday that they are withdrawing the plan. Right, just coming up to 7:17.
At 8 with the latest BBC News for Hampshire, Dorset and the Isle of Wight, I'm Michael Coombs. Campaigners across the Isle of Wight and the New Forest say they're delighted after plans for a pipeline have been scrapped. ExxonMobil had been considering 3 options for the carbon dioxide pipe from its Fawley refinery near Southampton to a CO2 storage site under the English Channel. The pipe could have gone under the island, but the oil giant has dropped the plans, blaming the government for uncertainty. Bob Comley is the Vice Chair of the Solent Protection Society.
I was delighted. We've been highlighting right from the start that ExxonMobil were very late entrants into the UK carbon capture and storage market. In our view, and I think many people, certainly on the Isle of Wight and in the Forest, it was never going to fly.
But a small warning from our political reporter Emily Hudson. Exxon's announcement may please many, but it might not be the end of the matter.
Fawley produces things we need: rubber for tyres, medical plastics, fuel. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of all that industrial production. And the company has said it needs to look at alternative ways now to help decarbonise by, of course, this net zero target of 2050.
Well, this all comes as the government is to announce it will invest nearly £22 billion in what it calls groundbreaking projects to capture and store carbon dioxide. Ministers say the new developments in Merseyside and Teesside will create thousands of jobs and pave the way for a clean energy revolution.
Right, Friday morning then, and after months of campaigning, residents, landowners, politicians in the New Forest and in West Wight are breathing a sigh of relief. This morning, plans for a pipeline carrying carbon monoxide from Fawley to the English Channel have been shelved by ExxonMobil. But what does that mean for net zero targets? Our political reporter Emily Hudson joins us now and can tell us a little bit more about this. Hello, morning, Emily.
Morning, Lucy.
Yeah, this has come out of the blue then.
Yes, really. I've been filming all week, actually, and was planning on telling you all about the campaigns that were going on by residents both sides of the Solent in West Wight, but also in the New Forest, about the Solent CO2 pipeline. Now, it was a carbon capture project. The idea was emissions, carbon dioxide, not monoxide, were made at Fawley Oil Refinery, were captured, sent via high-pressure pipeline to a storage area under the seabed in the English Channel. Now, carbon capture is a way that has been suggested for dealing with heavy industry like Fawley Oil Refinery, where they make things like rubber for tyres and plastics and fuels to try and help decarbonise them. The highly controversial bit about this pipeline was that it was going to go underneath either the New Forest or the Isle of Wight and require significant digging. Residents and landowners were pretty worried about it. What would happen to the land after it was installed? What would happen if the pipe burst under the land? But so, as I said, there'd been loads of objections. Yesterday afternoon, sort of out of nowhere really, we got an email from someone saying, did you know that the pipeline has been shelved by Exxon? They said in their kind of, blurb, as it were, that they felt it was no longer a competitive investment. But they also criticised the continued lack of government policy certainty and timelines. Well, this morning we found out that 22 billion has been pledged for carbon capture projects in the north of England, in Merseyside and Teesside. So perhaps, the clever among us might argue that it's their project that's not got the money, and therefore that's why they're saying they don't feel that it's getting that certainty. Well, only Exxon will be able to tell us that. Green campaigners had always raised concerns about carbon capture, saying that would it extend the life of planet heating oil and gas production. So it's worth saying that Fawley will still keep making those things. It will still keep putting out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So although campaigners are delighted, I guess it's what happens next to make sure that some of that doesn't go into the atmosphere, and what ExxonMobil will come up with for decarbonisation, because of course they're part of the net zero target for 2050.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Emily Hudson, here on BBC Radio Solent. Well, listening to that is Nick Hubbard from Bewley Parish Council. He's one of those who just this week, he was talking about putting up posters, banners, with the team fighting this campaign. Let's get his reaction this morning. Hello, morning, Nick.
Morning, Lucy. Hi.
Yeah, Emily there saying surprised, shocked by this news. What about you?
Just elated, absolutely delighted. I got a WhatsApp message at 4:31 yesterday afternoon, and I couldn't believe my eyes, to be honest.
Mm. And what's your thoughts then? I mean, what have other people said? You got this message at 4:31. What's the reaction of locals to this?
Oh, the chat groups just went wild. People were so pleased. Lucy, we've been really worried about this, as Emily has said, that there is an impact on the forest. Of course, we are a triple SI. We've got lots of protections for birds, wild fauna, flora, wetlands, all of that. And there were international legal agreements around that. And none of that was really being, I think, addressed by Exxon in the way that they were going to deal with it. What was quite interesting, and the communities between the Isle of Wight and the mainland have really worked together on this. And the more we research these pipelines, and most of these have been laid in the United States, they are susceptible to leaks. And carbon dioxide is a dangerous gas, and that has meant hospitalizations and evacuations of villages and all that sort of thing. This pipeline, for instance, if it was on the mainland, was going around Lymington. So we estimated there's about 60,000 people that could be exposed, not at one time, but within a couple of miles of a leak, and it could be a serious health risk. So it wasn't just the impact on the forest. We were really, really concerned about the health issues involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking about the health issues, the loss of this pipeline, Fawley is still emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the plastics, the rubber, the fuel. That is still there. So what do you hope will happen next?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, because this whole consultation has been a bit strange, and the more one thinks about it, I'm not that surprised it's been cancelled. They were going to put the gas into Christchurch Bay, into an aquifer, that was what they call it, which is deep underneath the seabed. But they'd not got permission to do that. So it was almost like having the cart in front of the horse. And what we were saying to Exxon is, look, why don't you do the simpler thing? Why don't you ship this round to the North Sea oil empty sort of oil beds? There were lots of deposit areas. You can do this in both the northwest and the northeast, and that's the easiest way of dealing with it. And that was part of our submission to Exxon, was to say, look, we think you should do this by sea.
Okay, well, it sounds like you kind of want to work more with them, which is interesting for a local group, actually, to have to want to have that relationship. Thank you, Nick, for coming on. Nick Hubbard there from Bewley Parish Council, speaking to us here on BBC Radio Solent. This story this morning. The campaigners breathing a sigh of relief. The plans for a pipeline carrying carbon dioxide from Fawley to the English Channel have been shelved by ExxonMobil. BBC Radio Solent at 8:16.
The sound of the South. And all the music you
Now, we got taken a bit by surprise this week. We've made a film about a proposed pipeline that ExxonMobil wanted to run from its plant at Fawley in Hampshire, either through the New Forest or across the Isle of Wight, intended to capture the carbon emissions from the plant and store them under the channel. They've been holding a public consultation. It closed on Monday. As you can imagine, there's been a lot of local opposition. Then, on Thursday, the company abruptly announced it was abandoning the plan. But as our Hampshire and Isle of Wight reporter Emily Hudson has found out, welcome though that decision was locally, it still throws up questions about our plans for net zero and just how much sway local feeling can have over major infrastructure projects.
These cows are enjoying life on the Isle of Wight. Their fields were on one of the potential routes for the Solent CO2 pipeline. The plan would have seen carbon emitted and captured at Fawley refinery sent via a high-pressure pipeline to a storage area under the seabed in the English Channel. The disruption caused by installing the pipeline had been worrying locals.
Some of these pipelines, you're limited on heavy machinery crossing it and what can be left on top of it, and obviously that could really impact what we can do with the land thereafter. Our other concern is the safety of our cattle and any other people in the surrounding area. If there's a leak, we don't understand the full implications of what this could do to the soil and the land ongoing, like, you know, if it would make it toxic, or we don't really know.
All summer, ExxonMobil had been holding consultation events, answering locals' questions from both sides of the Solent. 3 routes had been suggested for the pipeline, 1 through the New Forest, 2 on the Isle of Wight. Exxon had said it needed the carbon capture scheme to help it hit government net zero targets by 2050. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of industry at Fawley, which makes fuels and chemicals, lots of things we use every day. As well as oil and petrol and diesel, it makes products like rubber for tyres and plastics. Locals had not been reassured.
This is like driving a 6-lane motorway across some many miles of either the Isle of Wight or the New Forest. A very destructive process through 2 environmentally very sensitive areas.
Taking on a multinational company, though, is tough. This cross-party group of islanders, meeting earlier this week, had been determined to make a lot of noise.
It's about everybody working together on this, and we've had residents, landowners, councillors, parish councils, town councils, everybody has come together and jointly put in lots of information.
So many people have come out of the woodwork who do have professional knowledge about pipelines, about the environment, about geology, about the carbon capture itself, and they've all said to a person that they don't want to see it happen here, they don't believe it can be done properly.
But on Thursday, the surprise. ExxonMobil said it was ditching the plan. The campaigners rejoiced.
I was running a scrutiny committee for the council, and somebody put a note in front of me, and it was very difficult not to stand up and shout, "Yay!" I was very pleased.
ExxonMobil said it decided the Solent project was not a competitive investment and blamed uncertain government policy. But on Friday, the government announced £22 billion for carbon capture projects in the north, Merseyside and Teesside.
Carbon capture technology is not just about cleaning up our industry and our energy sector. It is a massive opportunity to attract investment and create thousands of skilled jobs paying good wages, the basis for a new era of prosperity in our industrial heartlands.
So the government is supporting carbon capture, even if Exxon has put the Fawley project on hold. The company says it remains committed to reducing emissions and will look at a range of alternative solutions. Although Nick Stewart feels the campaigners have a victory, he is worried about the wider policy.
The influence of these large oil majors who want to carry on pumping oil and gas is immensely damaging for a country that recognises the problems of climate change and that wants to do something about it. So if the government had put their £22 billion, instead of going to carbon capture, if they'd actually gone, let's resurrect our green investment plan, I'd be a bit happier.
A lot of thoughts still left with us. Let's start with the planning one, first of all. Paul, is this NIMBYism?
It's concern amongst local people, I think, and you might call that NIMBYism, but obviously people that have concerns about this need to be listened to. It
sounds like they were.
They were. I mean, I think this is a bad decision. I'm concerned that, you know, if we have things happen like this, then it does set back our net zero targets. Fawley is an immensely important site. I suspect they're slightly worried about some funding. You had the announcement with the 2 carbon capture sites up in the north. I hope this isn't the case of the south being neglected by a new government, but I just don't think this is a good thing. Although in the planning process, you know, I met Fawley and ExxonMobil a couple of weeks ago. They were very keen to see this go ahead, so I'm not quite sure why there's been a sudden change of heart, but the consultation was going ahead. People obviously weren't happy, and they've been listened to. But I just hope that doesn't go too far into stopping big, vital projects that we need to go ahead in the future.
Yeah, I mean, do you know any more about what's going on here? Because some of these things can be decided at the centre with the changes in planning you're hoping for.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, obviously I'm not privy to all the decisions that government are making. What I would say is that, as Paul said, 2 major carbon capture sites have been announced in Merseyside and Teesside, £21 billion worth of investment. So the government is very pro, we just heard Rachel say, very pro carbon capture and storage. I don't know the specifics around this particular site.
Perhaps they're not so keen on a large international oil giant funding something like this. I mean, they're the guys with all the technical expertise, but then they really want to keep producing oil, don't they?
Well, I mean, so that is a good question about the transition from oil and fossil fuels to net zero. And I think the government has been clear, and Ed Miliband has been clear in the government, that it is a transition. So we are moving away from fossil fuels, but it's not going to happen instantaneously. So carbon capture is part of that transition, but it's not an end in itself. So, you know, things like lifting the ban on onshore wind farms, making sure that renewable energy is coming online as fast as possible. We're not sticking with fossil fuels, but carbon capture is a good thing in and of itself, and also the amount of jobs it's going to create up north. I hear what Paul's saying about why this hasn't gone ahead down here. I think we don't have all the information at the moment.
Well, the manifesto, your manifesto, said it will happen in every corner of the UK. Well, I think we're a corner, you know, I mean, and coastal communities were mentioned.
Quite a major one as well.
Yeah. I mean, and this is a way of transitioning, because presumably, as we all drive electric cars, we won't be needing Fawley so much.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I agree with everything you've said. I think this particular specific issue, we don't have all the information. We do know that there were some local objections to it, and as you said, those do need to be listened to. I do think carbon capture is part of our transition and will go ahead. Whether this specific project goes ahead, I don't know, but I do know those 2 major ones are going ahead. It's part of the plan. It will happen, but we are moving towards net zero, clean energy and renewables.
Paul, you'll say you're in favour. I mean, and I heard Keir Starmer saying on Friday that a third of the geologically researched areas where probably we've been extracting oil, we know about, are off Britain for the whole of Europe. So we could lead the world in doing this. Does it need government subsidy?
I think it does. When you look at technologies that are evolving, and although a big oil company obviously earns billions of pounds, they do have that resource, they do have that R&D capability, and they also employ people locally. You know, Fawley is a major employer in the south.
Do you worry that it might not be able to employ somebody?
I do now, I do. And what I also worry about is the speed at which the new government is trying to transition from traditional fossil fuels to cleaner energy. No one argues that that doesn't need to happen. But if you look at some of the policy announcements around North Sea gas and oil in Scotland, as well as some of the way in which they are alienating and removing themselves from those industries in order to go into greener energy, that actually at the moment will mean, because we don't have the capability at the moment, that energy bills will go up. This government promised to freeze energy bills, but if we go too fast, then those energy bills will go up for people, which is why the last government took the decision to just slow that down slightly in order to have that transition in the right way.
Do we still need stretching targets?
We absolutely do. So I would dispute what Paul has said. I think it's perfectly possible to transition in a swift and efficient way and make sure that people's energy bills are actually measured. We're not going to suddenly decrease the energy bills overnight. I think Ed Miliband has been clear about that. But we are not saying that tomorrow we cut off the oil supply at all. We're saying we are transitioning in a just way. It's incredibly important. We're the Labour Party. We believe in justice, equality, fairness. That means we have to protect people's jobs. That means we have to make sure sure that the poorest in society still are able to, heat their houses with reasonable energy bills. But alongside that, we've got to move towards net zero. It's perfectly possible to do those things. You've got to work hard as a government to do it, and that's what we're going to do.
OK.